Court. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Sua Williams-Seo. Talofa lava.
Talofa lava.
Mai oi.
Manuia whawhatai.
Whawhatai lava.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I found the earlier remarks by two of the government's backbenchers quite upsetting. They made wild and unsubstantiated claims about their welfare reforms, which to me, sir, reveals too much about themselves. That reveals their disconnection with the wider community. It also reveals that they haven't read their own regulatory impact statement, which says that their reforms have gutted the welfare system. I would ask them to take some lessons from their own minister, Chester Burrows. He is a minister who knows what this is all about. I agree with the minister when he says that the New Zealand social security system has largely been a system that most Kiwis are proud of. I think for our country, we have this view that we work, we pay our taxes, and through those taxes there is a safety net, so that when someone is unemployed, when someone is sick, when someone is disabled, or when someone reaches a certain age where they're too old, weak to work, like some of the members of this House, without mentioning names, that at least there is a safety net. And that's been the legacy of our social security system. And I accept, sir, that it is only then natural that when someone rips off our system, absolutely we get upset. Absolutely it is the wrong thing. So I think people need to understand the context of why some of us don't agree necessarily with the arguments that that government has put up. Look, Labour, let's make it quite clear. Labour supports and will support this bill to its first reading so that the appropriate committee, the Social Services Committee, can then do its work and call for submissions and have the advantage of at least listening to the organisations and people who are working on the ground, who are having to deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis. And so, but in saying that we support this to the Select Committee, sir, we do have some very, very strong reservations. I think people need to understand, sir, the context of, as we debate this bill, that for the past 5 years, we in the opposition have been attempting to hold this government accountable for the current economic and social woes the country's been experiencing. And we've asked questions of this government about critical areas where there is a need for significant action by this government to address things such as the need to create more jobs, to address the high unemployment, the need to have higher incomes, to address the needs of our communities who are struggling, the needs around housing, where many families are paying a huge chunk of their income on rent, and home ownership becoming a distant dream for the majority of New Zealanders. So that's the context, sir. So when a government which is clearly failing to reduce the growing gap of inequality comes up with these particular proposals, and when a government continues to use the excuses that they're unable to do anything about the growing gap of inequality because of the global financial crisis or the Christchurch earthquake, that really then causes problems for the public who are listening to this debate, because, sir, it becomes harder for people to accept that there is a genuine need for this government to make the amendments that they are proposing, considering the context that I've just outlined. And most people then start thinking that, look, is this genuine, or is this really just a cynical move by this government to take the heat off themselves from failing to address the more pertinent issues that people of New Zealand are facing? And so let me just give some views on some of the areas that people are discussing and which I think it's important for the Select Committee to consider. A few weeks ago, there was a Victoria University Law Associate Professor who released her research, and her research showed that Inland Revenue was more likely to write off unpaid tax, whereas the Ministry of Social Development would often keep welfare debts on its books, sometimes until people died or retired. I want to raise this research, sir, because in the regulatory impact statement of this bill, it makes reference that the group of people that is being targeted through this particular bill is very, very small. And here's some numbers that I got out of the regulatory impact statement for the 2011-2012 financial year. The cases of fraud that the ministry investigated, 10,735. The cases that they were able to establish where overpayment was made was 2,139. But the cases that they could substantiate and prosecute for fraud was 714. In the regulatory impact statement, it also identifies, sir, that the overpayment were not the fault of the beneficiaries, but the fault of the department. And so I would hope, sir, that the Select Committee, when they're deliberating this, dig deep into the causes and whether the money that we are going to spend as a parliament in attempting to find fraud is worth the effort that has been taken. And I'm not saying, sir, that we deviate from prosecuting those who have committed fraud. I said in the beginning that we don't like that sort of thing. Anybody ripping off the system is wrong. But I'm suggesting, based on the report by the research by Victoria University, that I think this government is failing to look at fraud generally on an equal basis. Here's what the research says again. Tax debt totaled nearly $6 billion, while welfare debt was about $1 billion, this researcher said. There appears to be no basis for treating debtors to the two government agencies differently. The study indicated that tax debtors got off more lightly. IRD was more likely to negotiate with debtors and collect core tax and write off penalties and interest, she said. Between the 1st of July 2011 and June 2012, the IRD wrote off nearly 50% of interest and penalties applied to overdue tax, amounting, sir, to $374 million. It wrote off $435 million in core debt, reflecting 11.6% of collectible debt, this study showed. MSD, on the other hand, wrote off $8.7 million in core debt, or 2.1% of collectible debt. The study also showed that in the same period, the average value of outstanding tax debt was $14,479 per taxpayer in debt, while the average value of outstanding welfare debt was $2,523 per beneficiary in debt. And so what the research noted, sir, that more resources were applied to collecting welfare debt than tax debt. And Ministry of Social Development would collect debts from beneficiaries' payments. And the point of the whole research which has been highlighted, there's a difference of treatment by this particular government or by the two agencies of those who have owe debt to the Inland Revenue Department and those who owe debt to the Ministry of Social Development. And the other difference, sir, is there is much bigger sums or amounts of money involved in Inland Revenue tax debt as opposed to a smaller amount of debt in social development and welfare. And that also is substantiated by their own regulatory impact statements. So, and that's why I'm asking the question. I would hope that the Select Committee looks deeply into this. The argument that's been put forward that surely by creating this new offence and punishing the spousal partner of the person who committed the offence, surely they would have known about it. Well, sir, I have doubts myself. Only 2 weeks ago, the courts found a beneficiary person, somebody who frauded the beneficiary department, guilty as charged. They also charged his wife, and after charging that, she was not prosecuted at all. Now, this causes a problem, sir, of charging people without having evidence and then having egg on your face. And I would hope that the Select Committee, sir, looks seriously at all those angles. And lastly, the appeals rights. I think, sir, that needs also to be looked at.
I call Alfred Naro.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honour to take a call this afternoon on the social security